I want to introduce now our guest speaker, Elisabeth Middleberg. She's originally from the Netherlands, and she came to the United States in 1984. She served as the chaplain at Kaiser San Francisco and was the pastor of the MCC Church in Guerneville for 12 years. She currently works as the spiritual care director at a retirement community in Oakland. There, she brings together her experiences in the Buddhist meditation practices and her affinity with the Christian tradition. We're very happy to have her giving the talk today. So let's welcome Elisabeth.
Good morning, Unity. I realized this morning that I've never been here without Cindy before, so it feels a little, but you are all here, so that is good. When Reverend Deanne asked me a while back, she said, could you give the talk? I said, Deanne, I come out of a different tradition and I don't quite speak the Unity language. And she said, well, then you speak your own language. Dus nu ga ik over in het Nederlands en ik doe dit verhaal op zijn Nederlands. En ik hoop dat jullie me allemaal kunnen verstaan. Just kidding. I want to thank Dallas and the band for bringing us this beautiful music. Thank you, Carolyn, for keeping this service together, and for the sound people, the ushers, Clay for reading that poem. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Now, I know you all just finished a 7-week series on the book of poetry called The Longing in Between. But I thought I would continue to enlist the help of poets, as in times of turmoil and chaos, when language starts to fail us or we just fall silent, it is often the poets who are still able to speak and find words that point to our collective humanity. It's the poets who are still able to express our hopes and fears. And the poem you heard this morning, Wendell Berry wrote that some 50 years ago, but he could have written it today, right? When despair for the world grows in me and I lay awake at night in fear, how does the poet do that? How do poets do it? How do they create just a few lines, just the paragraphs, to speak some words that resonate within all of us 50 years ago and today? Now, Cindy mentioned a while back when she was giving a talk that we had the opportunity to go see David White in San Francisco. Am I making the sound? Okay. Should I not move? Say that again.
Just be careful with the mic on your scarf.
All right. Be careful with the mic on my scarf. All right. I'll try it. Let me use a regular microphone. All right. Is that better? Good. Good. So we were at an evening with David White, and before he would recite his poems, he would talk about how these poems came into being. Sometimes within the quiet of his study, and at other times he said he would be outside and sit in the countryside, waiting, and allowing himself to drop down into these different states of being. And it reminded me of the mystics who dropped down into different levels of consciousness. In that place where our deep internal experience engages with the outer world, the world becomes visible in a new way. And it's the mystics and the poets who can speak the language to explain to us what they are seeing. Poetry is nourishment for the soul, as it makes these deeper interiors that live in us visible as well. This is one of David White's poems that he read that night, and it's called Still Possible. And he says, it's still possible to fully understand that you have always been the place where the miracle has happened. That you have been, since your birth, the bread given and the wine lifted, the change witnessed and the change itself. It's still possible to fully understand that you have secretly been all along a goodness that continues to be a goodness to itself. I will bring some of his words back at the end of this talk. And then there is Wendell Berry, who says, when despair for the world grows in me, and I lay awake at night in fear. There's so much fear around us right now in the world, right? Ongoing wars, pandemics, climate change, challenges in our personal lives. And then just now in this last month, we have seen the atrocities and horrors escalate in the Middle East. Such loss of life. In both Israel and Gaza, such unspeakable grief, such fear of what is still to come. When despair for the world grows in me, what a way to start a poem. And I wonder if we even realize how much the fear around us affects us, how it enters into our bodies, how much it occupies our minds and grows our fear. This war may be in the Middle East, but the awareness of it lives right here in our bodies. We truly are one body. And when we are afraid, we tend to tighten up. We tend to tighten our muscles, but it includes tightening our heart muscle. It's impossible for our bodies to tighten up just the arm and not the rest, or to tighten up some parts of our body and not our heart muscle. And in order to keep the world at bay and the challenges we face, we may stay in that somewhat contracted position. You know, sometimes when people say, how are you doing? And you say, I'm holding on, or I'm hanging in there. That's literally what our bodies do. And unfortunately, when our hearts tighten and we try to extricate ourselves from the world around us in our fear, we also run the risk of just becoming more isolated, more lonely. Now, through my work and through other places where I'm at, I was already thinking these last couple of months about fear and the fear that grips my heart and our hearts, and about the insanity and the cost of war, and about our inability to take care of each other and to take care of the world. And even more than thinking about that, I was looking at what the questions are to formulate. Questions that have something to do with how do we want to show up in the midst of all that is going on? How do we respond? What is it that we want to hold on to? And what is it that we can bring forth into this beautiful and oh so challenged world of ours? And these questions seem even more pertinent as we continue to reel from what is happening in the Middle East. Now, like many of you, I've been following the news and the developments in the Middle East, initially only with that sense of despair, that sense of grief. How do we as communities think and feel our way through this? Who and what do we listen to? Now, as you heard, my practices are Buddhist practices. My tradition is the Christian tradition. So I'm part of several sanghas, and one of them is a sangha that is started by a woman called Eve Marco. She's a Jewish Buddhist teacher. And her sangha is a sangha of Zen peacemakers. They organize retreats in Auschwitz to bear witness. They're on the ground in Ukraine to bring food and other things that they need there. They've been on the ground in Israel and Palestine with a vision to see a lasting and just peace in the Holy Land in a way that honors the dignity and rights of all peoples. And they commit to 3 tenets, 3 precepts. And they are: 1, to listen deeply; 2, to bear witness; and 3, to loving actions. To listen deeply, to bear witness, and to loving actions. So Eve Marco, over these last couple of weeks, has created several spaces where she has gathered people and say, come, let's come together. This was on Zoom, and listen, just listen to one another. And so we gathered with people from all over the world, from Israel, Palestine, Brazil, Australia, Germany. And she said, this is not a space to recount what has happened. This is not a space for political analysis. She said, I want to hear how everybody is doing. I want to hear your heart. And so a woman from Tel Aviv spoke up. She's a psychologist, exhausted from the war around us, exhausted from the work she was doing. And she said, there are so many stories right now, so many narratives. There is, they should not have done this, they should not have done that. And she says, please do not have any opinions, because they divide and they create more suffering. And in that very same gathering, there was a man from Palestine involved in the Holy Land Trust around Bethlehem, who addressed what had happened in Israel, but then also spoke about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. And he said, please do not be one-sided. Please do not be one-sided. One-sidedness creates more suffering, and we see that, right? The more one-sided people are, the quicker divisiveness happens. And I find that I can breathe in the spaces where people are listening to one another, where people are able to express their grief to one another, where we recognize one another as each other. Please do not have opinions. Please do not be one-sided. Please do not engage in narratives of dominance, of cause and effect. Stay with narratives of caring, of bearing witness. And I try to continue to follow those guidelines. And when we do need to speak, may it be in spaces of deep listening, in spaces where people can hold the complexity of different narratives together. Now, I listen to the Dutch news because it's less sensational often than the American news. And just 2 days ago, I heard that the Dutch are preparing vessels to go to the Mediterranean Sea. And these are not war vessels. These are vessels that contain within them complete hospitals. They have helicopters, and they have smaller vessels that they carry that can land on beaches. And so once they get there, within an instant, they can provide help and humanitarian aid with much more capacity and much more ability. And I checked it with my nephew, who is a high-ranking officer in the Dutch Navy. I said, is this so? And he says, yes. He says, we are readying the ships. And he says, the French already have, and they're in negotiations as well. And he says, but that's just one of the options. There are planes ready to go. May peace come. May ceasefire come soon. But it settles my heart to know that there are people on the ground who still believe in this peacemaking commitment that they have. It settles my heart to know that in all kinds of places in the world, people are ready to come in and to help out. How do we navigate these times? How do we show up? And what is it? What is it that you and I can bring forth? Now, I actually went back into the tradition I was ordained in, within the Christian tradition, not so much to look at any particular teachings, but with the question, how was this teacher, this prophet, Jesus, able to continue to bring himself forth in a world that was just as frightening as the world that we see now? Because 2,000 years ago, the Roman Empire occupied Israel, and they were just brutal. Brutal in their taxations of the Jewish people so that people were so poor. Brutal in taking out the people that would speak up, that would offer resistance. And this was all on public display, so people knew what happened if you spoke up. So how did Jesus do that? How did a Martin Luther King do that, who also had threats to his life and knew what was happening to people around him? And I think some of what we see is that Jesus continues to act, continues to heal, continues to reach out, continues to touch people, literally touch people, even the people who were untouchable in his time. Continuing to reach out in the smallest of ways, continuing to bring forth in the world what it is that we have to bring forth. A friend of ours who was really affected by the climate change a little bit back, Amos White, he said, I'm going to do the only thing that I know what to do. And so he planted a tree. But as he was planting a tree, he imagined and he brought forth this project, which is now called Planting 100,000 Trees in Alameda. And just a week ago, this project received a $2 million grant so that they can continue to do what they are doing. Jesus continued to manifest what lived within him. Some say the universe exploded in this man. And the other thing that we see Jesus do is that he continues to give language to what it is that he does believe in, what he imagines a more just world would look like. This is what the realm of God looks like, he says. Everybody gets to belong. And those who are hurt will be attended to, and those who are oppressed will be set free. That is the vision. I talked about fear a little bit, but one of the things fear does is that it limits, it robs us of our capacity to imagine something different. It limits the imagination, which is a big thing because we have to imagine, we have to believe in what is possible, what we can create together. Jesus continued to give words, continued to language what was in his DNA, what it was that he needed to bring forth in the world. And he continued to speak about this realm of God, this divine DNA that lives in all human beings. The realm of God lives within you. There's such power in bringing forth what lives within us. A while back at work, I was involved in a conversation, and out of the blue, somebody said, "So what do you still believe in?" Now, I love a good question, but on the spot, it was a little hard. But I heard myself say, I still believe that as human beings, that we have within us the DNA, that we have within our communities, the DNA and the wisdom and the knowledge of how to be a people together, how to take care of each other, how to take care of this planet. And we can bring that forth. Within our DNA, within your DNA and my DNA, within the DNA of this community, we know and we can bring forward to create a more just, a more creative, and a more humane way of living together. Now we say that, right? That the universe lives within us. So let me take you on a little side journey. I'm going to talk about the Sufis, this mystical arm of the Islam, for a little bit, to show you that the universe really, literally lives within us. Probably the Sufis are best known because of the whirling dervishes, right? It's an order that created in the 13th century. And the dervishes twirl and twirl, trying to get to that oneness with the divine, trying to get as close as they can in this helix of connecting with divine love itself. But within the Sufi order, we also find Sufi architecture, which is not as well known. And these architects project onto the world of stone and wood what lives within them. And so we see this beautiful architecture, right? And like the poets who drop into their being and bring forth the poems and the world they engage in, these architects make visible their internal world. This is not just about mathematics, right? This is a projection of what their internal world looks like. Now, fast forward 400 years. We find the James Webb telescope out in space, which started to bring us images from space just last year. Right? But see what happens when we take a piece of the architecture of the Sufi mystics and we put it right next to one of these pictures. Do you see that? Can you feel that? Hundreds, maybe thousands of years ago, these mystics had some internal experience of this vast universe around them. They had some awareness of these constellations that were part of their own internal being as well. And they took their experience and they brought it forth on wood and on stone. The universe, in all its grandeur, in all of its love, literally lives within us with limitless possibilities. Now, we're probably not able to bring forth all that lives within us, right? It wasn't too long ago that Cindy came up to me and she says to me, I have been thinking. Now, I have to tell you that when Cindy says I have been thinking, my system goes into slight panic. Because usually she has thought about this wonderful project that she tries to manifest, and it only needs A, B, C, and D, and somehow my name is connected to A, B, C, or D. But I manage my slight panic, and I say, what have you been thinking about? And she said, I'm starting to realize that I cannot manifest everything that I am thinking about. And I said, you're just now thinking about that? And she said, yes. And it clearly was a disturbing thought to me, to her. I only was living in a prayer that this new awareness may take hold. That was my prayer. We cannot bring forth everything that moves through us. But I do think that you and I, that we each have a particular constellation, a particular affinities, particular ways of loving, particular ways of caring, of harmonizing that only you and only I and only this community can bring forth. Now, a 10-year-old girl understood these concepts. It's amazing what kids understand. And I got to hear about her from a keynote speaker who was the executive director of Girls, Inc. It's an empowerment program for girls. And the keynote speaker was talking about this girl, Ellie, 10 years old, that she was walking around the track with, and they had a particular sweet time. And so the ED said, she said, Ellie, how do you think that happens, that we have these amazing encounters that are just really so heartwarming? And Ellie said, well, she said, I think this is what happens. She said, I think that God has a lot of ideas of how to make this world a better place. And then God takes one of those ideas and wraps a body around it and sends it to Earth. And then it's up to us to figure out in our lifetime what the idea was that God has put in our bodies and sent us to Earth with. poets, mystics, and children. Well worth listening to. Divine DNA living in us. There is great beauty in the DNA of this community. If I think back of last week, of Frendas, and we were together, and we're just bearing witness to one another, bearing witness to these beautiful moments that we had, bearing witness to grief, but also bearing witness to beautiful memories. And the choir was singing. I'm so grateful, more so today than ever before, I think, for the people who bring music and infuse our world with music and settle us down. There's great beauty in the way that you come alongside each other when there's times of grief and times of joy. And I think that this world that so worries us needs the beauty and the wisdom inherent in this community and many communities like this. You have been since birth, David White says. You have been the bread given and the wine lifted. You have been all along a goodness that can continue to be a goodness to itself. And to come back to Wendell Berry, when he talks about his fear, and when fear gets too much of him, he says, this is what I do. I go and I lay down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and where the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things. You know, really, when your heart rhythm is a little too high, the best thing to do is to just lay outside on the ground. It'll settle your heart rhythm down. I come into the peace of wild things and into the presence of still water, and for a time I rest in grace and I am free. Now, the first time I read the poem, I thought, oh, he's kind of escaping from the world, right? But no, I think what he's doing, he's saying that when fear gets to you, it's good to go to those places where you can de-stress your heart, so that you can rest again in the wisdom that lives within you and in the larger wisdom of the world. I go and rest in the grace of the world. How do we find our way through? I think it's a question we are all trying to answer. But may we listen deeply. May we bear witness and act and move from this great love which flows through the universe, which flows through us, which is us. And may we bring forth whatever particular divine DNA we were sent into the world with. It is possible to understand that I have and always have been the place where the miracle is happening. Will you notice with me? It is possible to understand I have always been the place where the miracle is happening. And so it is. Amen.